co-organized in partnership with UN Women, that is called Gender Finance. The time is now. The focus of this evening, gender finance, is not just a topic of discussion. We really want to show today that it is also a powerful tool to drive progress and foster equality. It's a tool that challenges the status quo, break the barriers, break the bias, and that continue to hinder the path of prosperity for half of the population. Yet, I would like to share with you some comments from students in Luxembourg that I was allowed to share with you today. So listen carefully to those comments. Is it that society has no problem to address that it creates problems where there were none to begin with? Why does a minority have to dictate the behavior of a majority? Why is everything about gender? These comments may not be the majority, but they still exist in our societies today. So to some of these comments, let me say a few facts from the recent snapshot of gender inequality from the UN Foundation. Nearly 40% of countries limit women's property rights. In 28 countries, women cannot apply for passport in the same way as men. In 93 countries, are not legally requiring to provide equal pay for equal value. Laws in 101 countries allow financial institutions to make it harder for women to access loans. And last but not least, 2 days ago, 15 out of the 133 world leaders at the COP were women. So there's a lot of these examples that we can mention here. And there is nowhere really on earth where women and girls can escape sexist laws, policies, and social norms. Yet, thankfully, there are also advocates of all genders. And in fact, more than 2,000 reforms have been passed over the past 5 decades to dismantle some of these rules that I mentioned. And progress on this front has been achieved in every region of the world. So you see, really, gender equality isn't just a women's issue, it's a human issue, it's an economic issue, and it's a matter also of social justice. And as we stand here in the 21st century, it's worth reminding ourselves that equal opportunities shouldn't be an aspiration. It should be a baseline. And here really lies the power of gender finance, leveraging the potential of finance to bridge the gender gap. And this is really what drove us back in May 2022 to set up a partnership and sign a memorandum of understanding with UN Women. And I remember when we signed that MOU in May 2022, I think UN Women and us, we had exactly the same ambition. We didn't want just to sign a paper. We really wanted to take some concrete actions. So let me take you through the journey that we, the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, have taken to that end. The first thing that we've decided to do really is to create a flag for gender-focused bonds on our LGX platform. And the idea of all of that was to really enable investors to identify those gender-focused bonds that allocate a totality of their proceeds or a portion of their proceeds to gender equality projects, or that set gender-related KPIs. We also wanted to make sure when we created that flag that those bonds that we identify as gender-focused bonds do not only target SDG number 5, but they also report on it. So they have actually KPIs on that. Today on the platform, we've got around 60 gender-focused bonds that are displayed. The second initiative that we've carried on is to perform a market study on the state of gender-focused bonds worldwide. That was published in May 2023. And Paul, my colleague, will explain the outcomes and the recommendations from that study later on. What we've decided also to do together with UN Women is to provide 12 case studies, and you can find them on UN Women website. Really case studies that detail gender-focused bonds, how they work, the type of issuers, the challenges and opportunities that they faced, so that this can also inspire other issuers in other regions to issue this type of bonds. We've also developed a course on gender finance to raise awareness about that topic and make sure that financial market players understand those instruments. And last, we've developed also services to assist issuers in integrating a gender component in their framework and also in their post-issuance reporting. So just to say that every bond issued, every gender-focused financial product launched is an engine of change. They help support women entrepreneurs, fund projects aimed at promoting gender equality, and they ensure that women have a rightful and equal stake in our shared economic prosperity. So indeed, as the title said, the time for gender finance is now, but it was also yesterday, and it will also be tomorrow. So this evening, we will listen to distinguished guests and speakers from UN Women, from the European Investment Bank, from the Ministry of Finance of Luxembourg, from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, and from NMB. And to start with, allow me to introduce you to our first speaker, Ms. Mejavina Larika, a regional policy advisor on women's economic empowerment for the East and Southern African Regional Office at UN Women. So now let's welcome Ms. Larika.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. Friends, colleagues, esteemed partners, it is a pleasure to be here today. I am honored to be here today to represent UN Women. And apologies from our Chief of Economic Empowerment, who was the one that was to attend this event. But unfortunately, there's another even higher level event that she's at, so you're stuck with me. So I would like to welcome you all to this event on gender finance at the EIB Benelux Pavilion at COP28. Whether you are joining us in person or virtually, your presence is important, and I extend a warm greeting to all of you. I would like to thank our partners on advancing financing for gender equality, especially the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, for co-hosting this event with us and for your commitment to advancing gender finance, and to the government of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg for making this event and our programmatic work on sustainable finance possible. Our hope is that the result of this event, we can make together progress on gender finance around the world, because it's not only about one country or the other, we need to do it everywhere. So why is it important to focus on gender finance? So despite some progress, where we have had some, achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal 5 is hampered by the multifaceted crisis, not least the disproportionate impacts of climate change and the conflict on women and girls. The UN 2023 Gender Snapshot reveals that the number of women and girls in conflict-affected areas has risen significantly to 614 million in 2022, a 50% increase from 2017. Under a worst-case climate scenario, food insecurity is projected to affect 236 million more women and girls by 2050. That's 236 more, not even looking just at our current situation. And if current trends continue, over 340 million women and girls, or 8% of the global female population, will still live in extreme poverty by 2030. And the gender gap in power and leadership hinders the changes we need. Women's share of parliamentary seats and management positions worldwide reach only 30% by 2050, at the rate that we are going right now. Financing challenges are widely recognized as impeding the achievement of the SDGs. We estimate that an additional $360 billion a year is needed to achieve gender equality and women and girls' empowerment in developing countries. Clearly, innovative financing approaches are needed to address these challenges to sustainable development and gender equality. So, enter gender finance, a strategy for gaining momentum alongside the rise of sustainable finance and impact investing. The numbers tell a very compelling story. Capital raised with a gender lens across private equity, venture capital, and private debt vehicles has increased 5 times between 2017 and 2021. So we are seeing a growth. Gender lens fixed income now amounts to a substantial 14.2 billion in assets under management, with multilateral development banks and other development finance institutions playing a significant role. While these trends are promising, the reality is that financing for gender equality is still small compared to other impact objectives. In 2022, the sustainable bonds aligned to SDG 5 represented just 1% of the $900 billion issued through various sustainable bonds. If we compare the sum of all gender-labeled products to the global assets under management, nearly $100 trillion, gender finance is a small player. Furthermore, this finance is largely concentrated in high-income countries, with 97% of the estimated 1.7 trillion in total sustainable investments held in the global north. In terms of sustainable bonds, the direct financing towards gender equality objectives, we learned from the study that LGX Data Hub that Europe leads the way, with 59% originating there, representing 80% of the total amount raised globally through such bonds. So what do we need to redirect capital towards innovations that we see in the market and align them to really make a change in women and girls' lives and change the unprecedented scale? We need to ensure the benefits of sustainable finance, especially gender finance, that reaches developing countries, where capital markets are less developed and gender gaps are much wider. This is why UN Women is raising awareness on the lessons learned from using innovative financing instruments for gender equality and providing technical assistance to strengthen standards, regulations, and transparency. For example, earlier this year, we partnered with LGX and worked on bond issuers to publish a case study series called Innovative Financing for Gender Equality via Bonds, already also mentioned. We highlighted 10 detailed fact sheets on bonds that had integrated gender equality into the objectives. You will hear later today about NMB from Tanzania, from my fellow panelist. The series also includes cases from Morocco, South Africa, Brazil, Mexico, and other countries where gender bonds were issued as pioneer transactions in their market. Around the world, investors and bond issuers are using gender equality bonds to finance interventions such as financing loans for women-owned small businesses or increasing procurement spending from Black women-owned businesses. In Spain, a subnational government raised capital via a sustainability bond to improve victims of violence, to improve services for victims of gender-based violence. Themes that are essential to the progress towards SDG 5 and that merit more attention from bond issuers include increased investment in the care economy, elimination of the gender pay gap, supporting social protection measures for workers in the informal economy, or increasing the offering of essential services to victims and survivors of violence against women. To boost gender finance, we need to identify the financing instruments and capital flows targeting gender equality for impact. Investors, especially those who apply a gender lens, value transparency. This is why having widely recognized principles, standards, and guidance and technical support is essential. These measures build trust and attract investors who are committed to achieving not only financial returns, but also positive social and environmental outcomes. UN Women is continuing to support the development and dissemination of these sources. Let me briefly just mention two. Tomorrow, UN Women and UNDP will launch a gender finance booklet targeting the Financial Centers of Sustainability Network, or FC4S. The booklet provides actionable insights following the 10 principles of the Gender Finance Charter that practicing financial centers signed onto earlier this year. 21 financial centers ranging from the Luxembourg to Cairo and from Rio de Janeiro to Abu Dhabi and Hong Kong have pledged to take concrete actions throughout 2024 for advancing gender equality with sustainable finance. Leveraging the action plans of the booklet, financial centers can strengthen women's leadership and representation across the ecosystems and implement gender-related targets. Specific examples are provided on development and adaptation of gender-responsive financial products and practices, and how financial centers can benefit women in all their diversity. The guidance is future-focused, as we are here at COP28. Addressing emerging trends and preparing financial center stakeholders for upcoming shifts in the industry. In the next segment, we will hear about the concrete actions that the Luxembourg community has taken to advance gender finance. The gender finance booklet will be available tomorrow online, and we invite you to take a look and see what is relevant for your financial ecosystem. UN Women is also working with the Financial Sector Deepening of Africa and the Financial Sector Deepening Network and the British International Investment on a toolkit to design the issuance of gender bonds in Africa. Gender finance in Africa faces challenges due to limited benchmarks, low liquidity, and inflexible regulations, as noted by IFC and several others. However, a gender bond market is emerging, supported by sovereign sustainable debt frameworks, regulatory guidelines, and initial gender bond issuances. We have seen these in Egypt, in Kenya, in Ghana, and in Botswana, and many more will come. Thus, we see movement as we see promise. We will hold 3 launch events in Nairobi, Lagos, and Lusaka for the Gender Bonds Toolkit and a training workshop for issuers and investors. Some of the guidance and the actions apply to any gender bond issuance anywhere, but the toolkit has been tailored realizing African women's empowerment and the nascent opportunities in African markets. Now is the time to invest in gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment through gender finance. It is not only a moral imperative, but a strategic necessity for a more equitable, sustainable future for all. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mijabin. And really, I invite you to speak to UN Women. They do an incredible work, especially also on gender-focused bonds. And we very much look forward to reading this gender finance booklet and the guide for Africa as well. So now let me turn to Laura Piovesan. She is Director General, Deputy Head of the Projects Directorate at the European Investment Bank. And we'll have a little conversation also on gender finance and what EIB is doing in that sense. So we've been talking a lot about climate and gender and that nexus that happens between the two. So I wanted to ask you, Laura, first, if you could explain what the gender and climate finance nexus is really, and why EIB includes a gender dimension in its climate financing.
Thank you, Laetitia. And indeed, I mean, the why we can understand it also from words of our previous speaker. There is not enough gender finance. So we really need to understand where the opportunities to broaden the gender finance are. For the EIB being the EU Climate Bank and having an important focus of our lending and over broadly activities on climate, it was very important, to put the spotlight on this nexus between gender and climate. Now, what does it mean in practice? So I think we can say at least 3 dimensions. The first one is that there is the power of diversity that can speed up climate action. So if we look at statistics, there are quite a lot of evidence and statistics on the fact that companies or banks that have a higher number of women present in the board are more likely to invest in sustainability and in climate, as well as in reducing emissions. Our own research at VAB confirms that and looks also at the performance in terms of sustainability and ESG scores of women-led enterprise. So financing more, so gender finance can also mean more climate finance as an indirect effect. This is the first side of the nexus. The second element is that, as I mentioned, we do have, there is a lot, and these days at COP, a lot has been pledged for climate. So if we manage to do that in a way that also advances social sustainability and inclusion, and in particular gender, what an opportunity. No? It's very important. When doing this, and that's the third element, one also needs to keep in mind that climate change hits most the more vulnerable areas of society. So again, when we design climate investments, be it transition or adaptation, we do need to keep in mind that the projects, that the investments need to support all areas of society, needs to be a just investment.
So we understand the general concept, but I was wondering whether you could also share concrete examples of what gender-smart climate investments look like at the EIB.
Absolutely, and thank you, Letizia. And then let me, take these examples along these lines that I mentioned. So, investing in female entrepreneur and female-led companies in order to drive the climate agenda. Now, an important way to do that is to focus on the smaller business, and we can do that by partnering with banks like NMB, for example, in Tanzania, with whom we have a line which focuses on smaller businesses in the blue economy, so on the climate agenda, which are also on which a part is also focusing on women-led. So again, you see this win-win. Another example of the same area is supporting businesses, green businesses. Now, one of the bottlenecks in green investments is the lack of skills. So again, why not supporting green and supporting women developing the necessary skills of working in that area? And one example is we have been supporting Cabify in Spain for their fleet to green their fleet of taxis, while at the same time hiring more women taxi drivers. Something which is also good for the business because there is demand of women taxi drivers from women clients. If we look at the second aspect of the nexus, so the fact that we need to invest in projects and investments which are well designed, support climate, mitigation and adaptation, but also support but are designed in a way which is gender inclusive. So in May this year, for example, we have signed a 350 million euros loan with IFAD. IFAD is the International Fund for Agriculture and Development, so focusing on agriculture and focusing on rural women growing more food in a sustainable way, and also climate smart way, connect women to the markets and increase their income and to become more literate and financially skilled. So other examples are when we finance, for example, Enel in Brazil, we look at how these renewable energy connections are also provided and ensure that these are also provided to women-led households, so increasing again their access to accessible finance. So you can see the nexus. No? There are a lot of opportunities. There are really a lot of opportunities, and I think it is important and it is a responsibility to explore all these opportunities to maximize the financial flows.
So I guess for you, if you can still hear us with the party over there, that's very important to understand that there are many case studies available in the market. So with UN Women, with the EIB, there's a lot of examples of how gender can be applied. So I would invite you also to talk to them, because that's inspiring also, if you want to do the same thing. I wanted to ask you also, what do you think can be done to accelerate financing for gender-smart climate investments? Because for the time being, there are ad hoc initiatives, but we also want to scale up on that.
So to accelerate, we need to measure. That's the first action. So what we have started doing a few years ago at the EIB is to start to track our gender finance. And what we have seen is that our gender finance, a large majority of this, 70%, is also climate finance, while only 7% of what we finance in climate has also the gender lens. So by measuring, we have been able to identify the fact that we need to do more. And we also are able to identify the areas where we need to do more. An important area is by financing more in adaptation. Clearly, this is an area where we can also be better able at targeting gender. So I think in terms of looking forward, what actions, what commitment we would take is to strengthen our investment in adaptation, keeping in mind this approach towards just investments, and in this case, just resilience. And tomorrow, in fact, in this pavilion, we will be launching our approach on just transition and just resilience for investments.
I think that's really important what you mentioned about measurement as well. That's really something that is absolutely key when we talk about gender finance. It's not just to have an overall intention, but the measurement, which is difficult, is really an important aspect of it. Last question for you, Laurent. More broadly, what is the EIB doing to create a strong link between climate action and gender equality goals in general?
I think what is important is to leverage these flows is partnership that help us in knowledge sharing. So both, sharing our knowledge, what we have learned on the field, but also learning from others. And there is a lot of knowledge on this panel today, so that's also a very good opportunity. An example of that, we are partnering with 2X Global, and we have partnered with 2X Global and BII and EBRD to launch in COP26 in Glasgow, Gender and Climate Financial Toolkit, which we also use, and it's a way indeed to share. We also work together, and we are part of the Luxembourg Gender Finance Task Force, and again, another forum, another opportunity to learn. But also in particular, I must say, we already heard quite a bit about the gender bonds. The bank is the first issuer of green bonds. We issued the first bond in 2007, and 50% of our funding is done through gender or sustainability awareness bond, but we don't have yet a gender bond. So this is something that we are really very interested in the session later on, and also on all your knowledge in the room about gender bonds. And I think this is a good opportunity going forward.
Thank you very much, Laura, for all this very precious insight. Now, since we talk about gender finance, and you remember I mentioned some examples of what the Luxembourg students could say about gender finance, we obviously need to put our house in order first. And for that, I'm delighted really to receive the Ministry of Finance here to talk about the way gender finance is addressed within the financial sector in Luxembourg. And for that, I have the pleasure to welcome Jennifer Denise. She is Head of Sustainable Finance at the Ministry of Finance in Luxembourg. Jenny, the floor is yours, and I invite you to speak very loudly.
Good evening. Thank you for having me for this wonderful event. And I'd like to really follow up on what we heard previously. So we heard Mejabin talk about gender lens and gender smart investing and the boom that is happening right now in the financial world. We heard from Laura about really how having women at senior positions means that a company will integrate sustainability and climate areas way more naturally into the company, and there's many studies that suggest that. Now, what does all of that mean for a financial center like Luxembourg? So this is really where we started to think about that financial institutions for gender lens investing ask for certain indicators and certain ticks to be made in their due diligence processes. However, nobody looks internally in their own companies how representation or how diversity is really in the senior and executive level in their own companies. So this is really where we thought about that gender finance is a topic that needs to be treated from both angles. You cannot just focus on gender lens investing alone to really assess what is happening in the own company of the financial institutions investing in those types of projects. Now, that led us in March this year to create the Luxembourg Women in Finance Charter, which is a collaboration between actors in our financial center, so from asset management, banks, insurance companies, actors like the European Investment Bank or the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, to sign this charter to basically say that they will be working towards boosting gender representation at senior, executive, and board level. And what's really important to us, that this is something that is just the beginning. We have 70 signatories at the moment from our financial center, and we're expecting everybody to report on their progress on the targets that they have set every year. And these targets will be made public, so there will be a report. So if these targets are not being met year after year, that also shows accountability and the seriousness of whether an institution is actually just saying certain things or whether they're actually integrating them into their business models. So we're actually at the very first data collection point at the end of this year. So it'll be very exciting. Early next year, we'll be issuing a report on the progress, also continuing to find more signatories for this charter. However, we found that this alone was not enough. This is why we actually created, Laura already mentioned it, the Gender Finance Task Force. Now, this is a group of 10 individuals at CEO and director level of the Financial Center of Luxembourg under the patronage of the Minister of Finance. And this task force goal is actually to find solutions for both angles that I mentioned. So on one side, we're looking at women in finance, so the representation of women at senior level in the financial sector. And on the other side, finance for women, so access for gender lens investing, finance, but at the same time, also retail products that are designed for women. Because we still live in a world where financial products are mostly designed by men without really considering different perspectives of different genders and in terms of their priorities that they might have with investing their money. So we launched this task force in September this year, so it's very recent. We're about to launch 8 working groups that will be working in the coming 5 years. So the next mandate of the new government of Luxembourg is also something in the coalition agreement, so that's really also a political priority to really boost gender representation in the financial sector, first and foremost, and at the same time working on boosting gender lens investing in our financial center to really make sure that finance flows in the right projects. Because as Laura also mentioned earlier, these two topics are really intertwined very closely. If we can work and manage to have equal representation of men and women on boards of big financial institutions, research has shown that automatically we will be looking more at investing in sustainable projects, including climate finance, including gender smart investing, gender lens investing. So I think this approach from two angles is really important. The final thing I'm going to say is that we do know that this is something that will be a long-term job. Inequality has been with us for decades. It's not something that we're going to change in 1, 2, 3, or 4 years. I think it's something where we really have to keep working, keep raising awareness, push also financial institutions, a very male-dominated world, to keep setting targets, reporting on their targets, and basically not give up. And I think we have a wonderful momentum at the moment in gender finance that we shouldn't leave up and really continue to push this going forward. And that's why I'm also really grateful to have actors like, the Stock Exchange, EIB, and UN Women to keep pushing forward this agenda. And we're very much going to continue this in collaboration with our financial center. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. So you heard we need finance for gender equality, and we need women in finance as well. And we very much look forward to the work of the Gender Finance Task Force. So now to continue to unwrap that topic of gender finance, it's my pleasure to introduce you to my colleague, Paul Shaheen. Paul is the lead of the LGX Academy. He's our main lecturer at the Academy, and he will present to you a masterclass on how capital markets can contribute to advancing financing for gender equality.
Thank you so much, Laetitia, and welcome everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. I believe you can imagine the difficult mission I have to do this evening. I need to speak for about 30 minutes. During them, I need to keep you awake. I need to maintain your interest in the subject. I have to make my voice louder than our neighbors, and I hope I will manage. So please bear with me. I will try to make it as quick and as beneficial for all of you. So as Laetitia introduced me, usually I do lectures, I do trainings. And today, actually, I'm here to talk to you about a very interesting topic, which is sustainable finance and gender. Definitely, if this wants to move. Oh. Yes, perfect. And actually, more precisely, I would like to talk to you on how capital markets can empower gender finance. First of all, let's try to link the gender with finance. What is gender finance? Gender lens investing is when you invest in an intentional way in order to have this impact on woman empowerment or gender empowerment at the same time where you have the financial revenue. So this is very much linked actually with sustainable finance, and the whole question around sustainable finance, is it like financially rewarding or not? And when we speak about investing in gender-related matters, here we are talking about investing in enterprises owned by women, offering services or financial products directed right away to women, products promoting gender equity, and products who meet the gender equality criteria. Most of the gender finance or the gender lens finance is linked to the SDG number 5 that I'm sure that you're all aware about, which promotes the gender equality and empower all women and girls. What could financial markets do actually for all of that? Financial markets can play an important role in financing progress toward gender equality and gender empowerment. And this can happen through most of the financial instruments that we already have in the capital markets. We can do it through bonds, we can do it through equity, we can do it through blended finance, we can do it through a lot of already existing instruments that we have. And just to make the link actually with the revenue related to gender, OECD in one of their studies actually they said that gender equality was amongst most interesting factors for investors to invest in those instruments, precisely because of the potential for return enhancements they can bring to their investments. So there is actually a concrete proof that investing in gender can bring a financial return also for investors, if you take it from an investor's point of view. In 2021, the International Capital Market Association, or ICMA, ICMA, provided the market actually with a guide for issuers of debt instruments to know better about how to use those instruments in order to empower gender. And this guidance actually made a momentum around how to use the sustainable instruments to finance gender-related factors. Definitely the guide provides a lot of guidance, let's say, for both issuers and investors at the same time on how to use these instruments and how they can deploy them actually for gender-related matters. And based on that guide, as most of you know us as the Luxembourg Green Exchange, where our expertise is highly focused on the debt side of the market and mainly on sustainable instruments, we said, okay, let's try then to see in that universe of already issued sustainable instruments around the world, can we really identify those instruments who have been focusing on gender or not? So we went into our data hub, which is a universe of, at the time of the study, 10,000 social, green, sustainable, and sustainability-linked bonds issued and listed worldwide. And we tried to see how many instruments already issued in the market, they tackle the gender angle. And we tried to say, okay, let's see if we can identify those instruments between the use of proceeds and the sustainability-linked bonds. So we said, okay, actually, when you issue a social or a sustainability bond, if you dedicate part or the full of the proceeds to gender-related projects, then the instruments can be qualified as gender-focused bonds. And this is under the use of proceeds. But actually, Laetitia mentioned this at the very beginning, and she said, we don't only look at the intentions of issuers, so at what the issuers say in their issuance documentation about gender. We look at their reporting, so the post-issuance reporting. And here too, we can identify those instruments who concretely contributed to gender-related. So under the use of proceeds, actually, you can identify the gender-focused bonds, the ones who either they say at the beginning, at issuance, they will contribute to SDG number 5 by investing in one or more of the eligibility categories they have identified, or at post-issuance when they have the reporting, when they speak about the concrete contribution they made for SDG number 5. But as you know, also we have in the market a very interesting instrument called the sustainability-linked bond. And here too we said, okay, if the sustainability-linked bond or the issuers of these instruments, they link the issuance with at least one sustainability target, which is highly focusing on the gender matters, then we can also qualify those SLBs as gender-focused bonds. And like this, we made a kind of identification for these two types of instruments, and based on this, we did the study that was mentioned at the very beginning to see what is the status of the market of these instruments. So the study, as I mentioned, it looked at more or less 10,000 sustainable debt instruments issued and listed worldwide through the LGX Data Hub, and we tried to understand what is the status of the market. As I've just mentioned now, this actually gender-focused bond can take any form. It can be green, as Laura also mentioned. So within the green finance, you have a lot of gender elements. So actually the gender-focused bond can be green gender-focused bond, or social gender-focused bond, sustainability gender-focused bond, or sustainability-linked bond, gender-focused bond. And according to the study, most of these instruments are social and sustainability bonds, which is not surprising because actually if you want to tackle gender in a very clear way, through those instruments, you will definitely choose the social and sustainability maybe instrument, because you have the social categories under these instruments. Very easy to identify the gender components within them. So most of the instruments which exist already in the market with this gender aspect are social and sustainability bonds, so 80% of the market. We do have also sustainability-linked bonds ones, and we will be talking about them later on. If we look at how the market developed in the last couple of years, we can definitely see that there was a steady, I would say, increase in the number of issuances of these instruments. I mean, don't look at the numbers, maybe the numbers don't say that much, but the numbers are increasing. So in some cases, in some years, it was doubling or even tripled the number of instruments issued. And there is very interesting aspect here to speak about. As I said, when we identify those bonds, we look at pre-issuance. So we can say that potentially at post-issuance, they should be also recognized or identified as gender-focused because they have said something in the issuance, at the pre-issuance time. This is why we have this potential of 81 instruments which were already issued in 2022, but we couldn't at that time say like 100% that they are gender-focused, but they are potentially gender-focused. And we were waiting for the post-issuance reporting to confirm this or not. This links me actually to say, and that was also mentioned by UN Women and by so many others today, that actually there is a big potential for this instrument to serve the gender equality and the woman empowerment. Because if you look at the statistics, and I'm sure that all of you are optimists, not pessimistic, you will see the potential in that market. If you are not optimistic, you will see, no, it's a niche market, just forget about it. And actually, it's still a very small percentage of those instruments focusing on gender. But we can definitely see the big part of the potential in the market. Some of the examples that we'll be talking about are the social bond issued by NME Bank, Tanzania, and we are very pleased that a full team is around here to speak to us about this experience. But we have similar cases coming from all around the world, sustainability bonds and sustainability-linked bonds too. Also, this thing was issued by UN Women that Europe and Asia are these, the two regions around the world heading the issuances of gender-focused bonds. Again, nothing surprising here because Europe and Asia are heading the markets in general when it comes to sustainable instruments. And gender-focused bonds is not an exception when it comes to this. Let's go a little bit into details. And let's start with the use of proceeds. Use of proceeds, I'm sure that most of you know what is it. A use of proceeds bond is when you use 100% of the proceeds to dedicated project. And in our case here should be to gender or less than 100% in this case because it's social and sustainability. So if we take the case of the social and sustainability bonds and we look at which categories exactly they financed, the two top categories we can see are the socio-economic advancement and empowerment and affordable housing. Now, these two categories are part of the 10 or 12 eligible categories social and sustainable bonds invest in. Definitely, you should be asking yourself a question, where is the woman in these two categories? Well, actually, it's indirectly there, because when you invest in the socio-economic empowerment in a society, definitely you have the woman, the gender element in it. And also when we speak about affordable housing. However, this reality is very clear when it comes to mentioning in a very clear way that you're targeting women in your investments. And actually, if we look at all the instruments that we've found, we don't see that much instruments saying in a very explicit way that they are targeting women. They target high-level categories that maybe indirectly you can understand that they will benefit women from it. But they don't say in a very explicit way that they're targeting women. But 45% of the issuers, they do. say explicitly that we are targeting women, and actually they use very specific terms sometimes. So they say that we will be investing in projects that will contribute or will empower women and or sexual and gender minorities, pregnant women, diversity-owned small businesses, etc. So this is a trend in the market that we hope that will continue, because it makes it much clearer that you're really targeting this category in your investments. Another thing that was mentioned also about impact metrics and stuff, it's true in all of this universe of instruments that we speak a lot about reporting and about how did you calculate your impact? How did you make it? Which impact metrics actually you've used, and why did you use this one? Why did you choose this one to speak about? And how did you calculate it? So this kind of still in work, I would say, universe applies also to gender-focused bonds. We don't see that much of issuances focusing on gender-related matters, using dedicated impact metrics, woman-related or gender-related. Only few of them use it, but when they use it in a very clever way, in a very nice way, because they really speak about very interesting metrics, such as the share of girls in school. It's very interesting to see how many opportunities you have provided, in education for girls in some areas. Women accessing micro-franchises, women's enterprises advised, and the number of victims of gender violence supported. So all of these impact metrics come from real case issuances coming from gender-focused bonds. But this also represents a reality in the market that issuers of this type of instruments struggle actually to find or to determine the correct impact metrics that they can really calculate or monitor and collect data around, and then put it in a report at post-issuance level. So this is the case of the use of proceeds. What is the case of the sustainability-linked bond? And again, I'm sure that you know what is sustainability-linked bond. It's a bond, you issue it, you use the money in the general purpose of the corporate, but you link the issuance to a sustainability target. And in our case here, the sustainability target will be a gender-related target. So if we look at our study, gender-focused SLBs, well, the abbreviation is SLB, account for around 6% of all the SLBs which were issued at the time of the study, well, more or less 1 year ago. Well, we should highlight again that the SLB market is very new. It started just like 3 years ago. So it's a very new, it's a very niche market, but the instrument itself is very interesting, because here we see that most issuers of the gender-focused SLBs are corporates. And maybe I didn't mention that in the case of the use of proceeds, social and sustainability bonds, gender-focused bonds, are mainly issued by sovereigns, sub-sovereigns, and international financial institutions. So corporates actually don't issue gender-focused bonds, use of proceeds ones. But here in the case of SLBs, we do see corporates, and this is not a surprise, because all SLBs, almost all, just to correct myself, almost all issuers of SLBs are actually corporates. We saw only 2 sovereign issuances of SLBs so far, since the beginning of the market. So it's a dominated, let's say, corporate universe. What to say about this market? 54% of the gender-focused SLBs have been issued by corporates. This is what I've just mentioned. And the examples we have here come from all around the world. We have an example from Equity, an investment company in Sweden, that issued an SLB with targets related to gender representation on the boards of all the companies under the portfolio. In Brazil, a stock exchange, B3, issued also an SLB with more or less the same target, having a percentage of women at their board management level. And we have different examples also on that type. Now, if we look a little bit about the sustainability targets that those issuers look at or they choose when they issue their SLBs, here we're talking, in the majority of the cases, actually, those corporates use to increase the number of women in their management and executive boards. This was represented in more or less 80% of the SLBs that we identified as gender-focused bonds. We can have other
like examples in different fields, but this was really the most like focused on by the issuers. Key observations, and I will close with these recommendations. As you can see, this is a very niche market, the gender-focused bonds, whether being under the use of proceeds format or the SLB format. It's increasing. It's definitely interesting. It's attracting a lot of interest from investors and from issuers. But in order for this market, according to our observations, to accelerate and really to empower the gender agenda, we need to tackle some of the weaknesses in both sides. In the case of the use of proceeds, we don't have a lot of issuances coming from corporates, and we all believe that the private side of the market should play a role. So maybe something should be done on the corporate side to make them interested in this instrument and in showing them that there is a business case behind this instrument. There is limited explicit reference to women in the target population specified by the issuers ex ante, so at the issuance time in their framework. So here maybe we need to help those issuers to better identify the gender element in different categories that they will be financing under the social and the sustainability bonds. Scarcity of women-related impact metrics. Here, it's a big topic because it has to do with the impact reporting in general, but I think by focusing on the gender element, we can actually identify some metrics who can focus on this, and we saw some examples, very interesting ones. So it exists in the market. It can be done. And the last one, the gender component restricted to some categories of projects, while we believe that the gender component actually is transversal. You can have it in all the categories that you will be financing under the social and the sustainability bonds, even under the green bonds. And if we look at the sustainability-linked bonds, our observations are the lack of materiality and ambitions of the gender targets. I believe this is something related also to the universe of sustainability-linked bonds. They have been criticized for their ambitions a lot of time, and this is not surprising also for the gender part of the SLBs. So a lot of work should be done also on how to make these targets that corporates mainly they promise more ambitious and more transparent also based on what they made it, and if it's business as usual that they can do without raising funds in the capital markets, or is it something that they really need to do through capital markets. Another maybe observation is the weakness of penalty mechanism. This is also linked to the SLB market in general, but again, there is no surprise in the gender finance part of it, and the limited availability of the benchmarking. Again, because the market is still very new, we have very few issuances focusing on gender focused from, under the SLB. So it's still very early actually to do a thorough, I would say, benchmarking. You can definitely have some examples, but you cannot yet generalize and to come up with conclusions about this. But the market is growing and it should come. And by this, I will close this masterclass. If you're interested about knowing more about the technicalities of all of this, I invite you to just look at the study that we mentioned during the panel. It's available on our website. It's publicly available. It's free. So please don't hesitate to download it and to talk to us if you have any comments on this. And to make it a little bit more real, with great expertise coming from NMB Bank of Tanzania, I'm very happy to ask a couple of questions to Mr. Aziz Shasha, the treasurer of NMB Bank. We're very pleased having you with us today. NMB Bank issued an SLB, gender-focused bond in 2022, and it was the very first gender-focused bond in sub-Saharan Africa. It raised $32 million, and I would like to start maybe the discussion with you about what was behind the idea, what was the origin behind this?
No, thanks. I think a good question, and thanks for having us, myself and my team from Tanzania. Maybe to start with, at a global level, 7% of women-owned businesses lack access to adequate credit. And that translates to about $1.4 to $1.7 trillion of credit gap at a global level. And we see that trickling down to Africa, to Tanzania, where most of the enterprises in Tanzania are actually owned by women. And so an idea came. NMB has been there for the past 25 years, and it's not to say we've not been financing women businesses. We were, but not in a manner that could actually lead to scaling up and closing up this gap. So in 2020, we came up with a women proposition, to look at all the needs of women, not just credit, but including savings and financial literacy. And so in 2020, yes, 22, we came up with a gender bond. It was after going through a similar session you've had today. So I want to believe from here, a couple of people would actually be looking to issue a gender bond. So we went with a user process bond. We were looking for a relatively small amount. In the bigger scheme of it, very, very insignificant. But for Tanzania, it meant quite a lot. So initially, we were looking at $10 million, but we ended up getting $32 million. And the whole idea was to also try and access global capital, because we made it in such a way that it's also aligned with the international capital markets principles, and having to get a second-party opinion also to give the investors confidence that indeed this is a US user process bond and actually it's going to the intended use. And so that was the thinking behind why we needed to do it in a much more focused way, and we're seeing that it's paying.
Well, I have to admit that I was completely taken by SLBs, so I said that you issued an SLB, but actually you issued a use of proceeds bond, right, which is gender-focused bonds. And I'm glad that you've mentioned also the standards in the market they have followed and the second-party opinion that you looked at in order to comply again with the best practice that we see in the international capital markets when it comes to issuing those instruments. What was the reaction of investors to this innovative issuance, I would say, if you can share with us some of this?
Yeah, I think it was to our surprise at that time, but I think probably not any longer. So it was oversubscribed by 197%, which was quite good, with a lot of interest from MDBs as well, but also domestic retail investors. We had a total of outcome of 1,600 investors in the instrument, which was actually quite good, balance between domestic investors and as well as offshore investors.
It's very interesting to see how the market is, accepting and reacting to these instruments in a way that no one could imagine, with the oversubscription, not only of your instruments, but the cases that we had at the market proved that they are oversubscribed always by investors, which means that there is a big interest in this. And in your case, I think gender is in the DNA of the bank. So it's not something new. The instrument was maybe a way to show concretely in the market, to the international market, how you're financing gender, but it's in your DNA. And maybe it would be interesting also for the audience to understand, since you have done your reporting so far, maybe some of the challenges that you have had in issuing and maybe also in looking at the impact.
Yes, and maybe just to, again, back to the question asked earlier. One interesting insight we got from these 1,600 investors, it turned out that majority were actually female. So just to show, female trying to support other female, but back at mind, we said, was it a question of how we marketed it? And it turned out, yes, a few people I met, male colleagues would say, Aziz, can you also do a male related bond, because I couldn't participate in that female. So again, and this is now for potential issuers that I think you need to see how you message the message so that it actually attracts both female and male, because that was the whole essence. But challenges are always there. Part of the challenges that we got was, especially for foreign investors. With the rate at which the currencies in some of these emerging markets are actually depreciating. Yeah. And the hedging costs, attached to, trying to balance the risk, it becomes quite expensive if you have a market that is, not very, deep from a liquidity perspective. Some, yes, will have loved to participate, but looking at the hedging costs and the fact that, in any case, most of these small businesses will be borrowing in local currency. So if you get dollars or euros, ultimately you need to figure out how you translate that into local currency equivalent so that actually benefits eventually the eventual owners. So I think that was part of the challenge we got. The second challenge we got was with respect to data.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned it, and rightfully so. So data from both sides. Mm-hmm. The data that you get from the eventual borrowers, most of these businesses are very informal. So I think really trying to formalize them becomes a very fast step in trying to actually create a pipeline for potential issuances. because in the absence of that, even when it comes now to impact reporting, you find that it becomes really difficult. You do it, but probably not to the level of accuracy that investors will actually like to see.
You have mentioned very interesting features about the instrument that are really innovative and really working this issuance. But I would like also to say that you issued in 2022, in March 2022,
That's right.
and by the end of 2022, you have allocated all the proceeds, which is something really, I would say, surprising in a very positive way, of course, because usually issuers suffer from having bankable projects in which they have to put the money.
That's right.
So I don't know if you can share with us how you managed to have all of this pipeline of projects ready to be bankable and investing in it.
Yeah, you recall I said we actually started this in 2020.
Okay.
So preparation started way before 2022. So I think that's very important. So we already had a proposition. We knew what they needed, and we had a couple of very good bankable projects. And so it was easy for us to simply just do deployment. And we had some nice, decent look-back period that we had to negotiate with potential subscribers to our bond, which was actually quite helpful.
So to do refinance, exactly, for some projects that were established before.
That's correct.
That brings me actually to maybe ask you about, do you have any recommendations for issuers who would like to tap into this market as you did in Africa or worldwide?
Yes, I think I'll say, first of all, I think the grand challenge that we face, especially in emerging markets, is the microstructure, and institutional designs of the exchanges, and including the financial markets. So capital markets and as well as financial markets. So from a policy regulation perspective, which I know a number of actors are actually looking at it, we need to really work to address some of the challenges in the institutional designs and microstructures of our capital markets to allow deeper penetration and to allow transparency, price discovery. I think that is very, very key. But the other one, potentially, again, data. You need to have clean data. Your onboarding processes at the point of onboarding clients, get as much information as possible, automate as possible, because that will eventually help you when it comes to impact reporting. Because I think the most important part in the whole this process is that investors are not just looking at what return you're actually paying, they are looking at the impact. And I'll say, if I was to raise money, just a normal 3-year money, not a gender bond, not a US or proxy bonds, I'll probably have to raise it at higher than a gender bond. So I think they look at return, but also equally they look at the impact, which is quite critical.
My very last question maybe for you. I believe this is not an ad hoc operation or transaction for NMB. So I believe your strategy is to continue in that, in that way, in issuing further, maybe sustainable instruments or gender bonds. I don't know if you can confirm this to us or not.
No, you're right. Like you said, 2022 March, and by year 2022, it was all gone. So immediately embarked on a journey to issue another similar type of bond. But this time around, we issued a sustainability bond, which we close, I think, in a few days, and we'll be announcing results before the 12th of December. But of course, already we know what is there. It's been extremely successful. And part of that, as you explained in your lecture, so sustainability, yes, it has a gender aspect as well, so social, green as well, affordable housing, including health, education. So I think we've received tremendous support from the market, and we hope that next year again we probably issue another one, because like you said, the opportunities are just so immense, and it's a question of really structuring a product that can really attract investors.
Well, congratulations on all these issuances. We believe that NMB is really paving the way for other institutions in Africa, in the region, and also around the world for the issuance of these type of instruments. Thank you so much for the insights that you shared with us.
Yep.
We were very happy having you with us. It's a pleasure to have the full team actually here. And I give back maybe the speech to Laetitia to conclude. Thank you.
To the close, that's better, to the close of the evening, I hope we made it really clear that gender finance is an urgent priority, but also that it's feasible. So there's a lot of examples that have been shared today to show that gender finance is an impactful way of fostering economic growth and social equality. And also, if I can say, because we are Peace Day today at COP, it's also an important tool to foster SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. So I want to express my deepest gratitude to our panelists and speakers for their invaluable contributions, and to all of you also for being part of that important conversation, and also, I hope, for starting your actions on gender finance. So as I said, the time for gender finance is now, and it will be tomorrow, so we can drive a meaningful change for gender equality. Just as a reminder, before I close as well, you are all invited, to the Sustainable Finance Luxembourg cocktail that will take place in the West in Dubai. So see you all there, hopefully, and thank you very much. Good evening.